The chime from my phone was just another sound in the quiet rhythm of my evening. The kettle was whistling, steam fogging the window that looked out over the city lights. It was a Tuesday. Tuesdays were for tea, for silence, for the slow, deliberate unwinding of a day spent navigating other people's chaos. I poured the boiling water over the leaves, the fragrant steam, a small personal comfort. Then I picked up the phone, and the world, for a single suspended second, tilted on its axis. The screen glowed with three names I hadn't seen grouped together in 5 years, Mark, Dave, Chloe. A trinity of ghosts from a life I'd buried. The message below was a casual spear thrown from the past and landing right in the center of my present calm. Hey, man, long time no see. We're grabbing beers at the Rusty Anchor tonight. Feel like joining the fun again? I read it once. Then again, my thumb hovered over the screen and I felt it, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in my hand. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was the physical memory of a seismic shock, a tremor from a fault line I thought had gone dormant half a decade ago, the fun again. Those two words were the poison in an otherwise bland cocktail of text. They implied a shared history of good times, of laughter and camaraderie, but that wasn't the memory that flooded me. The memory was cold and sharp and smelled of cheap whiskey and humiliation. It was my birthday 5 years ago. I was 30, and my world had just crumbled. The startup I'd poured my soul into for 3 years had collapsed, taking my savings, my credit, and my sense of self. With it, I was adrift, a husk of the ambitious man I'd been. And these three, my inner circle, my ride or dies, had taken me out to a dinner I could no longer afford, at a place they knew was a monument to my former success. I remember the booth. Red vinyl, sticky with spilled drinks from patrons past. I remember the weight of their stares as I tried to explain the failure, my voice thick with the despair I couldn't hide. I was raw, exposed, begging for a lifeline from the people I thought were my anchors. Mark had leaned forward, a smirk playing on his lips. "Leo, buddy," he'd said, his voice dripping with a false sympathy that curdled in the air between us. "You're a washed-up failure. It's just a fact. Maybe it's time to stop dreaming so big." The words had landed like physical blows. Dave had chuckled, a hollow, nervous sound. Chloe had just looked away, her silence a louder agreement than any word could ever be. They had recorded it, I found out later. A shaky, covert phone video of my most vulnerable moment, edited to make me look like a babbling, pathetic fool. They'd shared it in our wider social circle. As a joke, they said, to lighten the mood. The final text I'd received from the group chat before I left it, and them, forever, was from Chloe. "Don't be so sensitive, we're just having fun." And now, 5 years later, here they were. Feel like joining the fun again? My hand steadied. The tremor was gone, replaced by a cold, solid stillness. The kettle had stopped whistling. The city lights outside my window twinkled, indifferent. I looked at their names on the screen. Mark, the smug corporate climber. Dave, the perpetual sidekick. Chloe, the silent accomplice. They weren't reaching out to apologize. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. This was a probe, a casual, cruel check-in to see if the wounded animal was still limping in the same forest. They expected me to be desperate. They expected me to be lonely. They expected to find the same broken Leo, grateful for any scrap of attention, even if it was laced with mockery. The invoice was never paid. I didn't expect it to be. The money was never the point. The point was the message, and the message had been delivered with the clean, surgical precision of a scalpel. I blocked all three numbers, Mark, Dave, Chloe, with a sense of finality that felt less like an act of anger and more like a necessary quarantine. They were a contagion I had finally built up an immunity to, and I had no intention of testing its limits. Silence returned to my life. But it was a different quality of silence than before. It wasn't the quiet of loneliness or the hush of a man hiding. It was the profound, powerful silence of a fortress after the siege has been called off. The gates were closed. The drawbridge was up. I went back to my work, to my routines, to the life I'd painstakingly built from the rubble they had left behind. I didn't hunt for information about them. I didn't need to. The world I move in is a small one, a network of whispers and discreet inquiries, and news has a way of finding its way to my door. It took less than a week. The first ripple came through a secure channel from a contact at a major tech firm. It was a casual aside in a conversation about a potential client. You'll never guess who just got put on a performance improvement plan, he mentioned, almost as an afterthought. Guy named Mark, mid-level manager in their logistics division. Apparently he's been a nervous wreck all week. Convinced the company was building a case to fire him, started second-guessing every decision, micromanaging his team into mutiny. He finally approved a shipment with the wrong customs codes, a rookie mistake that cost his department a six-figure fine. The higher-ups didn't fire him, but they put him on probation. His career is on life support. I felt nothing. No schadenfreude, no triumphant thrill. It was just data. Mark's paranoia was a predictable outcome. He had spent years building a fragile castle of perceived stability, and all I had to do was whisper the word earthquake. His own fear did the rest. He wasn't ruined, but the foundation of his professional life was now cracked. And he would be the one spending every waking moment staring at those fissures, waiting for the collapse. Dave's undoing was even more elegant in its simplicity. A real estate developer I'd consulted for in the past, a man who valued my discretion above all else, reached out for a casual lunch. Over steak, he mentioned he'd been considering a property deal with a local agent, a guy named Dave. Seemed eager, maybe a little too eager, the developer mused. I took a sip of water and offered a single measured piece of advice framed as professional courtesy. I've heard whispers, I said, my tone neutral. Nothing concrete, just talk of partnerships that didn't pan out due to unreliable commitments, probably just gossip, but in this market, due diligence is everything. That was all it took. A seed of doubt planted in fertile soil. The developer, a man who built empires on certainty, dropped Dave the next day. Dave's main client, the one who was supposed to be his ticket out of debt, vanished. He wasn't bankrupt, but he was back at square one, staring into the abyss of his own financial obligations without his primary lifeline. He had tried to mock a man who understood the leverage of information, and he learned that a single well-placed word can be heavier than 1,000 insults. Then there was Chloe. Of the three, her fate was the most publicly poetic. She tried to weaponize our encounter, to spin it into content. She posted a vague, tearful video to her dwindling follower count about dealing with toxic people from your past and how success can make old friends jealous. She painted herself as the victim, hoping for a wave of supportive comments and new followers. The internet, however, has a long memory and a sharp eye for inconsistency. A few people who had been in our social circle 5 years ago remembered the real story. They remembered the edited audio. The public humiliation comments started to appear. Wait, weren't you the one who posted that recording of him? This feels revisionist. Trying to play the victim after what you did is pretty cruel. Her attempt to gain sympathy backfired spectacularly. Her engagement plummeted. Brands she was negotiating with quietly ghosted her. She wasn't canceled. She was simply exposed. The facade of her influencer career, already chipped and fading, now showed the crumbling wall behind it. She had tried to tell a story, and the audience had fact-checked her in real time. They weren't ruined. I hadn't wanted that. Ruin is messy and loud and requires more of my energy than they were worth. This was something else. This was consequence. This was the natural, almost gravitational pull of their own poor character. Given just the slightest nudge, justice wasn't served in a courtroom or a dramatic confrontation at a bar. It was delivered through the sheer, intimidating weight of who I had become. They had reached out to poke the man they remembered, and they had found their hands resting on a mountain. The mountain didn't move to crush them. It simply existed, and in its shadow their own smallness became terrifyingly, undeniably clear. Their lives, already fragile and perched on the edge, were just knocked off balance, and from where I stood in my quiet, fortified silence, the sound of that fall was the sound of perfect, final peace. The leather of the armchair was cool and smooth against my skin, a stark contrast to the warmth of the studio lights. Across from me, the journalist, a sharp woman named Evelyn with intelligent eyes, leaned forward slightly, her voice a calm, professional murmur. We were discussing market volatility, but the subtext of the entire conversation, the reason for this feature in the stratagem, was the quiet power of anonymity in an age of relentless self-promotion. The industry refers to you as Midas, she said, not as a question, but as a statement to be acknowledged. A name born from your ability to turn corporate disasters into golden opportunities. Yet you've remained a ghost. Why is that? I took a slow sip of water, the glass cool in my hand. There was a time when such a question would have sent a jolt of old anxiety through me, a phantom limb of a past self that craved validation. Now, there was only a deep, resonant stillness. Visibility's often mistaken for value, I said, my voice even. A lighthouse doesn't need to be on the shore with the beachgoers. Its power is in its beam, seen from a distance, guiding ships through the storm. That is enough. Evelyn nodded, making a note. And your personal life? The profile mentions a profound sense of contentment that seems at odds with the high-stakes world you operate in. A genuine small smile touched my lips. This was the heart of it, the quiet victory that no balance sheet could ever capture. My life is built on different currencies now, I explained. The currency of a quiet morning with a book that has nothing to do with market trends. The currency of a conversation with a colleague where the only agenda is mutual respect. The currency of a silence that isn't lonely, but is full and rich. I gestured vaguely around the elegant but impersonal studio. This is my work, but my life exists outside of it. It's in the small circle of people who know me, not the persona. There are no performances there, only truth. As I spoke, my mind didn't flicker back to their faces. Mark, Dave, Chloe. They were like photographs in an old water-damaged album. The images blurred and faded into irrelevance. They weren't haunting ghosts, they were simply a lesson, a single harsh chapter in my education. They had taught me the precise cost of false camaraderie, and in doing so, they had inadvertently funded my pursuit of everything real. The memory of that group text, that pathetic attempt to reel in what they thought was a wounded fish, now felt like something that had happened to another person in another lifetime. The anger was gone, the hurt was gone. All that remained was the crystalline clarity their betrayal had forced upon me. My business has grown, I continued, answering her unasked question about success, but growth is a natural byproduct of focus and excellence, not the goal itself. The goal is to do work that matters, with people who matter, and to build a life that sustains you. The rest is just noise. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, studying me. You seem remarkably at peace for a man who navigates chaos for a living. It's because I do navigate it, I said. I'm not drowning in it anymore. There's a profound power that comes from knowing your own worth so completely that the opinions of others, especially those from a past you've outgrown, simply lose their gravitational pull. You stop fighting old battles. You stop trying to prove anything to anyone but yourself. You just become. And in that becoming, you find a kingdom that is entirely your own. The lion, I thought, but did not say the old tired metaphor. They see the lion sleeping and think it is weak. They see it awake and roaring and think it is dangerous, but they rarely understand the lion that is simply content. The one that surveys its domain from a quiet vantage point, powerful not because it is hunting, but because it is utterly, unassailably secure. It needs no one's approval. It fears no one's challenge. It simply is. The interview wound down, and as I stood, shaking Evelyn's hand, I felt the solid ground of my present beneath my feet. There were no ghosts here, no unresolved scores. The invoice had never been about the money. It had been the final definitive line drawn in the sand. It was the moment I had officially priced them out of my life, and in doing so, I had reclaimed every single minute of my future. Walking out of the studio, the hum of the city felt like a symphony. Not a cacophony. I was going home, not to an empty apartment, but to a life I had built with my own hands, a life of quiet purpose and profound, unshakable peace. The anonymous giant was going home to a kingdom that was real, and it was entirely, beautifully his. They say you should forgive and forget. I've heard that my whole life. It's the tidy, polite thing people tell you when they don't know what else to say. It's a nice sentiment, a clean bandage for a messy wound. But I've learned something in the quiet years since my world fell apart. Forgiveness is not an obligation, and forgetting is a form of self-betrayal. You don't owe your past that kind of power, so I say you should outgrow and outclass. Let me explain what that really means. Doesn't mean you spend your days plotting or simmering in bitterness. That's just another cage, one they built for you and you willingly walk into. Outgrowing means you become so focused on your own path, on building a life so authentically yours, that their voices simply fade into a distant, irrelevant noise. You stop trying to prove them wrong because you're too busy proving yourself right. You stop wondering if they see your success because you're the one living it, breathing it every single day. Outclassing them isn't about being richer or more powerful, though that can be a byproduct. It's about operating on a completely different moral and emotional frequency. It's the quiet dignity of refusing to play their petty games, of having standards so high that their attempts to drag you down don't even register on your radar. Your value isn't determined by those who left you behind. Let that sink in. For years, I let their words define me. Washed up. Failure. I carried those labels like a lead weight in my chest. I thought my worth was a group project, and I had failed to get a passing grade from my so-called friends. But that's the lie they sell you. Your value is not a democracy. It isn't up for a vote. It is an internal, non-negotiable truth. It's defined by the standards you set for yourself, by the integrity you uphold when no one is watching, by the resilience you show when everything is falling apart. It's in the discipline of your mornings, the honesty of your work, the depth of your character. They can't touch that. They can mock it. They can try to devalue it, but they cannot actually diminish it unless you hand them the keys. Stop letting people who abandoned you have a say in the person you've become. When you become someone they can't afford to insult, that's not revenge, that's peace. Revenge is a hot, frantic energy. It's exhausting. It requires you to constantly look backward, to stay engaged with the very people who hurt you. What I found was something far colder, far more powerful, and infinitely more satisfying. It's a state of being where their opinion is rendered financially, socially, and emotionally obsolete. They look at you from the shore, and you're so far out to sea that you're just a speck on the horizon. They can shout all they want, but the wind carries their voices away. That distance, that unassailable position is not about vengeance, it's about liberation. It's the profound, soul-deep quiet that comes from knowing you have transcended the entire battlefield. Remember your worth. It's the most important commandment you will ever follow. Not your net worth, not your social worth in the eyes of others, but your intrinsic worth as a human being who has endured, learned, and rebuilt. That worth is your armor and your compass. It tells you what to walk toward and what to walk away from. It tells you who deserves your energy and who does not deserve a single second of your thoughts. Now, go set your own price. This is the final, most crucial step. For too long, I let others set the price for my time, my attention, my friendship. I let it be cheap. I let it be taken for granted. Setting your price is an act of profound self-respect. It means you look at your hours, your talents, your peace of mind, and you declare, this is what it costs to have a piece of me. Doesn't have to be $1,000 an hour. It can be the price of your respect, your trust, your vulnerability. It means you stop giving discounts to people who have proven they don't value the product. It means you stop showing up for meetings you weren't meant to be in. When you set your price, you are not being arrogant. You are simply being accurate. You are stating a fact about your own existence, so define it. Be brutally honest about what your time, your energy, and your spirit are worth, and then defend it. Defend it with the ferocity of a lion protecting its den, because no one else will. The world will try to bargain you down, to tell you you're asking for too much. Don't listen. Your peace is priceless. Your progress is non-negotiable. Your life is the most valuable asset you will ever hold. So set the price and then have the courage to collect it. They had no idea who they were texting. The man holding the phone wasn't the one they'd left behind. He was a man forged in the fire of their betrayal, tempered by silence and hardened by a resolve they could never comprehend. The insult wasn't in the words themselves. It was in the sheer, breathtaking audacity of their assumption. I placed the phone face down on the counter. The tea was steeping a deep amber now. I watched it, my mind no longer in my quiet kitchen, but already strategizing, analyzing, calculating the game, it seemed, had just been invited to begin. And they had foolishly sent the invitation to the wrong player. The alarm on my phone doesn't beep or blare, it breathes. A soft ascending chime that pulls me from sleep the way dawn coaxes open a flower. No jolt, no panic, just a gentle, inevitable return to consciousness. My hand finds the phone on the nightstand, silences the sound with a single tap, and the day begins. 5:30, on the dot. The first thing I do is not check messages, not scroll through a feed. I stand by the east-facing window of my apartment and watch the city bleed from black to bruised purple to a soft, hopeful gold. This is my time. The world is quiet. The only sound is the hum of the refrigerator and the distant, fading sigh of the last night train. This apartment isn't large, but it is mine. Every piece of furniture, every book on the shelf, every shade of gray on the wall was chosen with intention. It's a sanctuary of clean lines and quiet spaces, a world away from the noisy, cluttered life I left behind. By 6, I'm in the kitchen grinding coffee beans. The ritual is meditative. The smell is rich and grounded. I pour the water slowly over the grounds, watching it bloom. There is no rush. There is only the process. This is the foundation of everything now. Process over impulse, discipline over motion. My workday starts at 7, but you wouldn't know it to look at my home office. There are no corporate logos on the walls, no nameplate on the door, just a large monitor, a comfortable chair, and a notebook made of thick, unlined paper. To the world, and to the very few people who matter in my life now, I am Leo, a freelance business consultant. It's a bland, forgettable title, and that's the point. But in the hushed, high-stakes circles where reputations are made and shattered in the blink of an eye, I am someone else. I am Midas. The name was never my choice. It was a client years ago who first used it. "You turned our lead into gold," he'd said, his voice thick with relief after I navigated his company through a scandal that should have buried it. The name stuck. Midas. The anonymous crisis management consultant. The ghost in the machine. My work is a form of psychological warfare dressed in the polished language of corporate strategy. A CEO is about to be ousted by his board. I don't just draft talking points. I map the allegiances, the secret resentments, the unspoken fears of every person in that room. I find the pressure points, the leverage. I show my client how to apply just the right amount of pressure to make the entire structure shift in his favor. A competitor's launching a smear campaign. I don't just issue denials. I dig until I find the rot in their own foundation, and I subtly, quietly hand a match to a journalist. I don't start fires. I just ensure they burn in the right direction. The skills I use are sharp, honed over thousands of hours of study and practice, strategic analysis, behavioral psychology, the architecture of influence. They are tools, and I wield them with the detached precision of a surgeon. There is no anger in it, no pleasure, only the satisfaction of a complex problem solved. This life, this identity, is a fortress I've built around myself. The two worlds, Leo and Midas, Never touch. My clients find me through encrypted channels. Payments are routed through a labyrinth of holding companies. My face is not on the internet. My past is not connected to my present. The people who knew me then, the ones who saw me broken and bleeding on the floor, they have no idea the phoenix that rose from those ashes, and that is how it must be. By 4 in the afternoon, the work is done. The monitor goes dark. The encrypted connection is severed. Midas recedes into the shadows, and Leo goes for a run. The rhythm of my feet on the pavement is another form of meditation. In, out, left, right. The burn in my lungs is a feeling I control. The ache in my muscles is a choice. It's a stark contrast to the helpless exhaustion I used to feel. Later, making dinner, a simple meal of roasted vegetables and salmon, I catch my reflection in the dark glass of the window. I look calm, in control. My eyes are clear. But if you look closely, and I sometimes do, you can see them, the scars, not on the skin, but beneath it. They are faint now, like old cracks in porcelain that have been repaired with gold. The Japanese have a word for it, kintsugi. The art of embracing damage and repair, the betrayal, the humiliation. It didn't just break me, it became a part of me. It's the reason I can see the fractures in other people so clearly. It's the source of my greatest strength and my most carefully guarded secret. I am content, truly. The quiet is not loneliness, it is peace. The solitude is not isolation, it is sovereignty. I rule this small, orderly kingdom, and for a long time that has been enough. The past is a country I no longer visit. I never thought it would try to send an envoy back to me. The phone sat silent on my desk for an hour. I hadn't ignored it, not exactly. I had simply registered the text, placed the device face down, and returned to the complex market analysis I was drafting for a client in Zurich. That was my life now, a life of deliberate action, not reaction. The vibration was a minor tremor in a day built on a foundation of granite. I took a slow sip of black coffee, the rich, bitter taste, a familiar anchor. Then the first buzz, a short, insistent vibration. I didn't reach for it. I finished my sentence, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The work was my sanctuary, my proof of concept. I had rebuilt myself from splinters into something solid, something formidable. The buzz came again, and then a third time, a rapid-fire staccato that broke my concentration. It was the sound of persistence, the kind that isn't born from genuine concern, but from bruised ego. With a quiet sigh, I flipped the phone over. The screen lit up, a cascade of notifications from the same group chat. Mark, Dave, Tool, Chloe, and you. The sight of their names huddled together like a pack still carried a faint phantom ache, a ghost of a wound long since scarred over. The first new message was from Mark. No greeting, just 4 words that dripped with a specific brand of condescension I remembered all too well. What, too good for us now? I could picture him so clearly, Mark with his perpetually smug half-smile, the one that said he knew your price and found it lacking. He was the ringleader of that final humiliation 5 years ago, the one who had leaned in, phone subtly recording, while I, drowning in the shock of a sudden layoff and a mountain of doubt, had foolishly bared my soul. He had packaged my pain as entertainment, and now, half a decade later, he was using the same old playbook. The assumption was that I was still that man, desperate, isolated, and pathetically grateful for any scrap of attention. Before I could even process the sterile anger that message ignited, another notification popped up. Dave. Of course, Dave the follower, the court jester who mistook cruelty for comedy. He hadn't written anything. He'd just sent a meme, a grainy black and white photo of a sad-looking old man sitting alone on a park bench. The caption read, "When your only friend is your shadow." A hollow laugh escaped me. It was so perfectly Dave. No original thought, just a lazy, low-effort jab meant to curry favor with Mark. He was the kind of man who built his entire personality on being the funny one in a group that had forgotten how to laugh without hurting someone. He was probably chuckling to himself, proud of his little digital snipe, imagining the others slapping him on the back for it. I placed the phone back down, my jaw tight. This was the pattern. The initial, seemingly benign invitation followed by the poking, the prodding, the escalation designed to provoke a reaction. They weren't reaching out to an old friend. They were poking a cage with a stick, expecting the same tired, wounded animal to snarl back. They wanted a performance. They wanted to see if the cracks they'd put in me were still there. And then the private message. The screen glowed with a separate notification, Chloe. My thumb hovered over the screen for a moment before I opened it. Chloe had always been the most dangerous of the three because she wielded sentimentality like a weapon. Her message was longer, crafted with a faux earnestness that was far more insidious than Mark's arrogance or Dave's immaturity. "Leo, we miss you," it began, and I could almost hear the saccharine tone in her voice. "We were young and stupid. Don't hold a grudge. It's pathetic to cling to the past like that. It's just a beer. Come on, be the bigger person." Every word was a calculated twist of the knife. "We miss you," the hook. "We were young and stupid," the non-apology, an excuse that dismissed 5 years of calculated cruelty as a simple, youthful indiscretion. But it was the next part that truly revealed her hand. "Don't hold a grudge. It's pathetic." She was reframing my silence, my absence, my self-preservation as a character flaw. My refusal to play their game was being labeled as my failure, my pettiness, and the final flourish, "be the bigger person." A classic manipulation, placing the burden of maturity on the victim so the perpetrators could continue their behavior without consequence. It wasn't an olive branch, it was a fishing line. They had cast their net, and when I didn't immediately swim into it, they started reeling it in, jerking it, trying to snag me. They weren't interested in Leo. They were interested in the version of me they had created. The broken, needy man whose humiliation had once been their sport. They missed their punching bag. I didn't feel the hot rush of anger I might have 5 years ago. Instead, a cold, analytical clarity settled over me. This wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about data. Their messages were a data set revealing their current state. Bored, insecure, and still operating at the same juvenile level. Mark needed to feel superior. Dave needed to belong, and Chloe needed to feel like she was in control of the narrative. They were exactly who they had always been. I closed the messages. The screen went dark, reflecting my own calm expression back at me. The old Leo would have typed out a furious reply, or a pleading one, or perhaps a pathetic agreement. The man I was now simply saw the board, the players, and their opening moves. They had made their play. It was transparent, clumsy, and rooted in the past. And I was a man who lived firmly and powerfully in the present. The game, I realized, was already on. They just didn't know it yet. I was about to delete the entire thread to just wipe their names from my screen and go back to my coffee when my thumb slipped. Instead of hitting delete, I tapped on a folder icon I hadn't opened in years. A digital ghost. Memories Backup, it was called. My phone, ever the helpful trader, had recently synced some old cloud data, and there it was. The first photo that loaded wasn't just a picture, it was a sucker punch to a part of my soul I thought had long since calloused over my own birthday dinner. 5 years ago, The Leo in that photo was a stranger, yet I knew him intimately. He was trying so hard to smile. His eyes, a little too wide, a little too desperate, were begging the camera to believe he was okay. He wasn't. I'd been laid off 3 days prior. The severance package felt like a coffin nail, not a safety net. The shame was a physical weight, a cold stone in my gut that I was desperately trying to hide with a cheap button-down shirt and forced laughter. And surrounding me, their arms slung around my shoulders in a mockery of camaraderie, were Mark, Dave, and Chloe. Mark's smile was a smirk. I see that now. Dave's eyes were already glazed with the beer he'd been downing. And Chloe, her smile didn't reach her eyes. It was a performance. In that moment, looking at the photo, I could almost hear the clinking of glasses, the loud music of the cheap sports bar they'd chosen, feel the sticky table under my elbows. I'd been raw that night, vulnerable in a way I'd never been before or since. They'd plied me with drinks with false concern. "Come on, Leo, talk to us. We're your friends." And like a fool I did. I talked about the fear, the dread of not being able to pay my rent, the humiliation of being deemed redundant. I confessed that I felt like a complete and total failure. My voice cracked. I was on the verge of tears right there at the table, and they were recording me. I didn't know it then. I found out a week later. Someone from our wider social circle sent me a link with a single message. "Hey, is this you? This is pretty rough, man." It was a 30-second audio clip, cleverly edited. They'd taken my most broken, whispered admissions and spliced them together, removing any context of their prodding questions, their feigned sympathy. It was just my voice, thin and pathetic, whining about being a failure, about having no future. They'd posted it in a semi-private group chat with the caption, "Leo's new theme song, Happy Birthday, buddy." A joke. That's what they called it later when I confronted them. "We were just messing around, Leo. Don't be so sensitive. You need to learn to take a joke." That was the last time I spoke to any of them. They didn't just kick me when I was down. They set up a tripod, recorded it in high definition, and sold tickets. And now their texts were right there, superimposed over this damning photograph. "Hey, man, long time no see. We're grabbing beers at the Rusty Anchor tonight. Feel like joining the fun again? What, too good for us now? We miss you. We were young and stupid. Don't hold a grudge." The juxtaposition was violent. The smiling, treacherous faces in the photo and the flippant, condescending words on my screen. They weren't reaching out. They were fishing. They were bored. Their lives, from what I could now infer, were likely small and unsatisfying, and they thought, "I wonder if old Leo is still as pathetic as he was. Let's poke him and see if he still flinches." And that's when I heard it, a soft, almost inaudible click deep inside my mind. It wasn't a sound of breaking, it was a sound of locking into place, like the final heavy bolt on a vault sliding home. The cold stone of shame in my gut didn't just vanish, it transformed, it heated, compressed and crystallized into something else entirely. Something cold and hard and sharp, a diamond of pure, focused intent. The trembling in my hands stopped. My breathing, which I hadn't even realized had become shallow, evened out into a slow, deep rhythm. The noise of the city outside my window faded into a distant hum. The world narrowed to this image, these texts, and the new, cold clarity in my mind. The man in the photo was gone. That broken, trusting, desperate man died in that group chat 5 years ago. They had buried him themselves. What they were texting now wasn't a person, it was a ghost they had created, and they had no idea what that ghost was capable of. The emotional storm, the hurt, the anger, the lingering sense of betrayal didn't disappear. It was simply rerouted, processed. It became data fuel. The part of me that had spent the last 5 years learning how to deconstruct corporate empires, how to manipulate public perception, how to wage psychological warfare in boardrooms, that part of me opened its eyes and looked at the problem before it. It was no longer a personal wound, it was a strategic scenario. They saw a lonely man. They thought they were inviting a loser for a beer. They were wrong. They were inviting a strategist to a battlefield, and he had just arrived. The silence in my apartment was never empty. It was a tool, a space I'd carved out for myself, filled with the quiet hum of a life rebuilt piece by deliberate piece. And then their text came in like stones thrown into a still pond. The ripples were there, but the pond was deep now. Deeper than they could possibly fathom. I didn't feel the old familiar sting of humiliation, not this time. Instead, a different kind of memory surfaced, cold and sharp. It wasn't the memory of their laughter or the sound of that edited recording they'd shared. It was the memory of the floor falling away, the absolute zero of having nothing and no one. That was the crucible. And in that heat, the man I was had burned away, and something else was forged. They see a lonely man. I know they do. They see the guy they left in the dust 5 years ago, the one they labeled a washed-up failure at his own birthday dinner. They think they're tossing a life preserver to a drowning man, inviting a loser for a beer for their own amusement. The arrogance of it is almost beautiful in its simplicity. They don't see the architect. They don't see the man who has spent the last 60 months studying the anatomy of collapse, not as a victim, but as a surgeon. They think they're inviting a ghost for a drink. They're actually inviting a predator into their pen. My phone felt heavy in my hand, not with the weight of their messages, but with the potential it held. It was a scalpel, a key. I opened a private browser, my fingers moving with a detached, clinical precision. This wasn't curiosity. This was reconnaissance. Mark was first, a few keystrokes, a cross-reference between his sanitized LinkedIn profile and some more nuanced industry forums. Mid-level manager at a tech firm that's been quietly trimming fat for 3 consecutive quarters. His name was on 3 separate anonymous posts from employees complaining about a specific panicky department head who micromanages out of a visible fear of being next on the chopping block. The language, the specific projects mentioned, it was him. He isn't just stressed, he's living on a razor's edge, terrified that the world will find out he's one bad quarterly report from oblivion. He clings to that title, that salary, like a life raft. It's his entire identity. Then Dave, the hustling real estate agent. His social media was a frantic, desperate carnival of forced enthusiasm. Another one sold, with a picture of a generic suburban house. A reverse image search showed it was a stock photo. A deeper dive into county property records, cross-referenced with his name on the brokerage site, told the real story. His last actual verified sale was 9 months ago. The comments on his post were filled with other agents offering support, which in that world is the polite code for pity. He's drowning, not in water, but in debt and the sheer, exhausting performance of success. Every smiling selfie is a silent scream for a commission check that never comes. And Chloe, the influencer, her feed was a curated museum of a life that had already peaked. The engagement on her posts was a ghost town populated by bots and a handful of loyal followers from 5 years ago. She was still using the same filters, the same poses, trying to sell a version of cool that had expired. She was clinging to the ghost of her former relevance, posting throwback pictures more often than new ones, trying to remind the algorithm and herself that she used to matter. Her entire existence is a plea to be seen, a fear of fading into complete obscurity. I leaned back, the glow of the screen illuminating my calm expression. There was no rage, no thirst for blood. This was just data, a series of interconnected, fragile systems. And I'm a crisis manager. My entire profession's about understanding pressure points, about applying the exact amount of force in the exact right place to either stabilize a structure or make it collapse. They had tried to break me when I was made of glass. Now I am made of something far denser, something they don't have a name for. Revenge is an emotional response. It's messy. It's about causing pain for the sake of pain. That is beneath me. What I am formulating is not revenge. It is recompense, an invoice. They wanted to buy my company, my friendship, my dignity, back then with their mockery. They placed a value on my spirit and found it worthless. It was the worst trade they never knew they were making. Now they can pay for it, not in apologies, not in regret, in the only currency the real world respects, in cash. They reached out to the past. They will be dealing with the professional. And the professional always, always sends a bill. The phone sat on my desk, its screen still lit with their little joke. Mark, Dave, Chloe. The three ghosts from a life I'd buried. Their messages were a familiar poison, a cocktail of faux concern and thinly veiled mockery. For a moment, I just watched the screen, my breathing even, my hands perfectly still. The old Leo, the one they remembered, would have been scrambling for a reply. He would have been desperate to prove he wasn't lonely, that he was doing just fine, thank you very much. He would have tried to win back their approval with self-deprecating humor or pathetic gratitude. That man was gone. He had died in the fire they lit 5 years ago, and from those ashes something else had been forged, something colder, something precise. I picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. This wasn't about emotion. This was a transaction. They had, all those years ago, tried to purchase my dignity. With their cruelty, they had made a down payment on my humiliation. Now it was time to present the final bill. My reply was not typed with anger. It was crafted. Each word was a carefully placed piece on a chessboard they didn't even know we were playing on. I tapped send. My consulting rate is $1,000 per hour. If you wish to schedule a meeting to discuss our past association and your current intentions, please confirm how many hours you're willing to book. All interactions are billable, including this text. Let me know. The silence lasted for perhaps 10 seconds. It was the quiet before the storm of their own incredulity. Then the screen erupted. 3 little dots dancing in frantic unison. Mark was first. LOL. Is this a joke, man? $1,000 an hour to talk to you? You finally lost it. Dave, ever the follower, chimed in with a laughing emoji and, "Bro, did you hit your head? We're offering you a free beer, not a business loan." Then Chloe. Her message was longer, dripping with the performative concern she'd always mastered. "Leo, this is really sad. We're reaching out as friends. You're turning this into something ugly. We were just kids back then. Let it go. Come have a drink." I read each message. I absorb the tone, the ridicule, the mockery, the subtle attempt to pathologize my response. They were trying to frame my strength as instability. It was a classic tactic of the emotionally weak. I felt nothing, no sting, no flicker of the old shame. Their words were just data, noise. I didn't engage. I didn't defend my rate. I didn't justify my position. To do so would be to enter their arena, to play by their rules of chaotic emotional debate. I was no longer a participant in their games. I was the rule maker. I had prepared for this. I opened a pre-drafted note on my phone. It was clean, professional, and utterly devoid of emotion. I copied it and sent it to the group. The clock starts now for this response. You have 60 seconds to acknowledge the terms before a 1-hour minimum is billed to each of you, payable via the invoice I will send. The reaction was immediate and panicked. The laughter stopped. "You're serious?" from Mark. "This is insane. You can't bill us for a text." From Dave, "Chloe tried a different tack." "Leo, this is harassment. I'm not paying you anything." I didn't reply. I was already moving to the next phase. On my laptop, 3 invoices were pre-generated. They were pristine professional documents. At the top, my consulting LLC's name. A bland, unremarkable string of words that gave nothing away. The service description read, "Initial consultation and strategic analysis, past association review." The amount, $1,000. Each invoice had a unique, secure payment link. With 3 clicks, I sent them, one to Mark, one to Dave, one to Chloe. The group chat went utterly, profoundly silent. I could imagine the scene in 3 different locations. Mark, probably in his soulless office, staring at the invoice, his heart thumping with a confusion that was quickly curdling into fear. Dave in his car between showings, sweating over the idea of a $1,000 charge he couldn't possibly explain to his wife and Chloe. In her perfectly curated apartment, her face pale as she realized the sad, lonely man narrative had just shattered, replaced by something she couldn't control or manipulate for content. They were no longer laughing. They were calculating. They were wondering. The seed of doubt had been planted. What if he's not bluffing? What if he can actually do this? I set my phone face down on the desk. The first move was complete. I had not sought revenge. I had simply stated my value. The shock and awe were not a product of my anger, but a natural consequence of their refusal to recognize the man I had become. They had invited a ghost to a party, and a king had shown up instead, handing them a bill for their audacity. The silence from their end was the most expensive sound they had ever produced. The silence in the group chat was a physical weight in my apartment. It had been 5 minutes since I'd sent the invoice, 5 minutes since their flurry of mocking texts had abruptly ceased. I poured myself a glass of water, the ice clinking in the quiet. I didn't need to check my phone. I knew the gears were turning. I'd thrown a wrench into the carefully constructed, petty little reality they lived in, and now the machine was seizing up. I imagined Mark first. He'd be at his desk, the one with the fake potted plant and the framed Employee of the Month certificate from 2 years ago. He'd have stared at my text, his initial scoff of disbelief slowly curdling into something else. Annoyance, probably. Then a flicker of unease. $1,000 an hour. It was an absurd number, a figure meant to be laughed at. But Mark was a mid-level manager, a creature of corporate process. His entire life was built on verifying facts, following up on leads, and covering his own ass. He would have opened a new browser tab, his fingers clumsy on the keyboard. He wouldn't have searched for Leo and crisis consultant. That version of me didn't exist in his mind. No, he would have started with the pseudonym. He would have typed Midas Consultant into the search bar, a half sneer still on his face, convinced he was about to uncover some pathetic wannabe life coach website. The first result would have given him pause. A sleek minimalist landing page, no name, no face, just the word Midas, and a tagline about corporate triage and strategic repositioning. No client list, no testimonials, just an aura of immense, expensive exclusivity. His corporate login would have granted him access to industry databases and premium news archives that the average person never sees. That's where the color would have drained from his face. He would have found the trade publication articles, the ones about the ghost consultant who had orchestrated the stunning recovery of Ethelred Industries after their CEO was caught in that insider trading scandal last year. The articles were vague, out of necessity, but they all mentioned the code name the industry had given my client, Midas. They spoke of ruthless efficiency, of psychological operations applied to corporate structures, of a fee structure so prohibitive that only the truly desperate could afford it. And then he would have found the kicker, the one piece of the puzzle I knew his corporate access could unearth, the one that would turn his unease into full-blown, gut-wrenching terror. It was a heavily redacted internal memo from his own company's C-suite, a post-mortem on the Ethelred situation, a case study on how to handle a crisis of that magnitude, and there, in black and white, was a line recommending the board retain the services of the consultant known as Midas, should we ever face a similar existential threat. The memo was addressed to his own CEO, the same CEO whose office was 30 floors above his own head. I could almost hear the choked, strangled sound he must have made, the frantic scrabbling for his phone. He wouldn't have texted the group. This was a 5-alarm fire. This required voices. He would have called Dave first. Dave, who was probably showing a crumbling 2-bedroom condo to a reluctant couple, trying to mask the desperation in his voice. Dave, shut up and listen. I could picture Dave's confusion, his instinct to make a joke. What, did Leo send you another bill? He's not joking. Mark's voice would be a tight, panicked wire. I looked him up. With the work login, it's him. He's Midas. Silence on the other end. Then a weak, who's Midas? The guy, the consultant, the one who saved Ethelred, the one our own board of directors has a standing order to hire if things go to hell. He's not some sad loner, Dave. He's a weapon. We just tried to mock a guy who charges corporations 6 figures to systematically ruin people for a living. The bravado they'd built over the last 5 years, the comfortable narrative of their superiority, it wouldn't just crack. It would vaporize. It would be replaced by a cold, sharp fear they hadn't felt since they were children. This wasn't about a grudge anymore. This was about a fundamental miscalculation of power. They had poked a bear only to realize the bear was a trained assassin in a bespoke suit. Then he would have called Chloe. I could hear her voice tinny through the speakerphone, initially dismissive. Oh my God, Mark, what is it now? I'm trying to film a GRWM. Chloe, it's about Leo. Ugh, is he still on that? It's getting pathetic. It's not pathetic. Mark would have nearly shouted, his professional composure utterly shattered. He's Midas. Do you understand what that means? The invoice is real. The threat is real. We didn't invite a loser for a beer. We just invited a predator into our pen and tried to slap it on the nose. The silence that would follow that statement would be the true collapse. It would be the sound of three separate worlds imploding at once. In that silence, they wouldn't be thinking about my reply or the invoice. They would be thinking about their jobs, their reputations, their debts. They would be mentally scanning every weakness in their own lives, every secret, every cut corner. And they would see me standing there, not as Leo, but as Midas, the anonymous force that could touch any one of those pressure points and bring their entire house of cards down. They weren't dealing with the man they betrayed. They were dealing with the consequence of that betrayal, fully realized and holding a bill for services rendered. The fear in that realization, miles apart but shared perfectly between them, would be more palpable than any words they could ever say.